as the Marines forced their way towards the southeast corner of the citadel, two A-4 jets dropped napalm to clear one area with devastating effect. Now able to use every weapon in their armory, the Marines in the citadel put all they had into breaking the hold of the North Vietnamese army on the Imperial Palace. Finally, to the south, around 150 Marine reinforcements stormed their way through to retake the Tong 2 gate, the gate that their comrades had been beaten back from 3 weeks earlier. After nearly a month of heavy fighting, the Imperial Palace was retaken and the city was back under South Vietnamese control. The battle for Hue was effectively over. Ho Chi Minh and General Giap's Tet Offensive had failed. They'd failed to prompt a general uprising of the people of South Vietnam. They'd failed to defeat the American and South Vietnamese in battle. Of all the 100 or so towns and cities they'd attacked, they hadn't held on to even one. And now the Viet Cong was effectively wiped out as a viable fighting force.
It was a devastating loss for the enemy. We thought we had done a wonderful job. In the big picture, Hue was a huge turning point.
Westmoreland had triumphed, or so he thought.
Throughout the weeks the Tet fighting had raged, the pictures of conflict flooded daily into American homes. And what the American public saw was a far uglier version of the war than they were expecting.
Rimming the edge of the courtyard, someone noticed small holes camouflaged. In almost every one, there's an enemy soldier.
Shocking images like these, and the summary execution of a prisoner by a South Vietnamese general, were broadcast on the evening news.
All this was not what many Americans believed they should be fighting for.
But perhaps the final blow was that the television and newspaper images suggested that President Johnson and General Westmoreland had got it wrong. The Tet Offensive appeared to show the communists were a lot stronger than the American people had been told. The end of the war seemed even further off than ever. America's most respected television news anchorman, Walter Cronkite, was just back from a whirlwind tour of battlefields ravaged by Tet. He filed a pessimistic report that would strike a chord with millions.
For it seems now more certain than ever that the bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate. But it is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
Something had to change. Johnson went live on television to announce a reduction in the bombing, but he decided it wasn't enough just to change policy. He faced re-election as president later that year, and people in his own party were now openly campaigning against him on a peace ticket. to the surprise even of his closest colleagues. He ended his broadcast on a note of high political drama.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
With Johnson's ultimate act of political self-sacrifice, the Tet Offensive had taken its most high-profile victim. The battle America's military claimed as a victory had turned into a political disaster. The Tet Offensive led to a huge shift in public opinion against the war and a change in government policy. The plan now was to strengthen and re-equip the South Vietnamese army in order to allow American troops to withdraw and South Vietnam to survive on its own. By 1973, all American ground troops had left. But the strategy was to fail. The South Vietnamese couldn't hold back the communists, and in April 1975, the North Vietnamese took Saigon. The war was over. The country reunited. The communists in power.
Over 1 million Vietnamese people died during the Vietnam War. But the trauma did not end in 1975. When the communists took control, huge numbers of South Vietnamese fled, fearing the new regime. The country that they left behind had been virtually destroyed by one of the 20th century's longest wars.
Most Americans had entered the war believing they were fighting a just cause. By the war's end, 58,000 Americans were dead, and the country was divided, embittered, and disenchanted. Americans still argue long and hard as to whether the terrible price they paid for this war had any real effect on the global advance of communism. What is true is that in spite of America's failure in Vietnam, communism, far from taking over the world, suffered one reverse after another. But the trauma that followed Tet was to burn deep into America's soul. And for years to come, Americans would be very wary about becoming embroiled in other foreign wars for fear of another Vietnam.